John 3 ended a discussion about keeping commandments and loving, etc., by saying that we need to abide in Christ and He in us. And how do we know that happens? Well, it happens by the Spirit that He has given to us. As chapter 4 opens, and of course John didn't distinguish between the chapters, it just kept right on moving, he's going to continue with this theme of, but how do you recognize the right spirit? Just because we claim the Spirit doesn't mean that we properly understand which Spirit is speaking and what the Spirit is saying. So he begins by warning against believing just any spirit just because it claims to be speaking for God. So we know by the true Spirit, so we dare not be deceived by false ones. Beloved, don't believe. The may in front of this word shows us that this is actually an imperative. So prohibition, may with present imperative. Otherwise, the form itself would look the same if it was an indicative. So the may tells us, don't believe pantinumati, every spirit. This word takes the dative when you talk about what we believe him, auto, believe every spirit. Don't believe every spirit, but instead, and now again we have a word that could be indicative or imperative. Here we don't have a may to help us, but the context, because the other one was a prohibition, this becomes then the contrasting command. Don't believe every spirit, but discern the spirits. Discern if the spirits are from God. So discern the spirits, perhaps implied to determine if they are out of God. Now that doesn't look like they are, does it? It looks like it is. That's in fact a singular verb, but neuter plural subjects in Greek sometimes use singular verbs. And we're going to see, we've seen two examples already. This is, I think, the third. Perhaps there's a couple more coming. So discern the spirits. They're not all coming from God. And now we're going to find out, where did I put my eraser, that the false spirits are very much connected to the false prophets, who are in fact the false Christ, the antichristoi that he talked about in chapter 2. So these are the people whose beliefs are wrong and who have gone out from the Christian community because they didn't really belong in the Christian community. They've gone out into the world. So John speaks as though there's two spheres. There's the sphere of the Christian believers who are from God, ek tu theou, and then there's the sphere of the world, which is really the source of the evil and the temptations. And so people are in the world, they've gone out into the world. Later on he's going to talk about them speaking ek tu cosmou. It doesn't mean they're out of this world, some other planet. It means that's the source of their speech. So, test the spirits if they are of God, because many pseudo-prophetai, many false prophets, have gone out, ex or ek, and this is the perfect of erchomai. It's actually a second perfect because it doesn't have the K, it just has the A. A little bit of an unusual reduplication, but you can confirm this with your principal parts. Elelutha would be the perfect of erchomai. So ex eleluthasin would be they have gone out. That's why they're there right now. Present implications. They have gone out into the world from the Christian community. In this, you know the Spirit of God, and now he's going to tell us in this. Here is how you know the Spirit of God. So the tuta in this case, tuto is looking forward to what he's about to say. Later on the next screen, we're going to see it looking backwards again. So here is how you know the Spirit of God. In this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit which, relative pronoun, confesses Jesus Christ having come. So every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come. except it's used as an adverbial participle. Every spirit confessing Jesus Christ having come, en sarki, is from God. So the crucial point that John is making here is that there are some people who are denying that Jesus came en sarki, in the flesh. John is facing a situation quite different from the earliest Christian evangelists who had to convince people that Jesus was more than merely a normal human, more even than a prophet or a rabbi, for that matter, more than the Christ. He was actually God's son. He was actually God who had come to live among us. So they were trying to demonstrate or prove the divinity of Jesus, whom everybody knew was a human. Of course he was a human. The Synoptic Gospels don't put any effort into proving he's a human because there was nobody doubting it. So yes, this human Jesus, was he more? Was he also God? John faces the opposite problem. He's in a context where there are many people confessing that Jesus is indeed God. He's indeed God's son. They just didn't believe that he really came in the flesh. He didn't become truly human, fleshly, human, part of this world of matter and space and time. And John is arguing, if you don't confess the true humanity of Jesus, you're a false prophet, you're motivated by the false spirits that have gone out into the world, you're speaking anti-Christ. In other words, the true humanity of Jesus is just as crucial to a correct confession of Jesus as the divinity of Jesus. So why would they deny the true humanity of Jesus? Wouldn't it be obvious that Jesus was a human person? Actually not, because they were being influenced by Gnosticism. Gnosticism had a clear separation between the spirit world and the physical world, and the physical world was inferior, the physical world was contaminating. Anything that was pure spirit wouldn't want to really touch physicality because it contaminates. It led to all sorts of ethical errors. The Corinthian church, for example, had two different responses. One group was, well, what you do with your body doesn't have anything to do with your real person, because your real person is your spirit, and they're not going to touch each other. So it doesn't matter what you do. Others had the opposite conclusion. Don't let anything physical contaminate the real person, who is the spirit. So this idea that you're really spirit, but you really are also human. Jesus is God having become truly human, is something that a Gnostic couldn't have accepted. And it led to a heresy that was called Docetism. Jesus only seemed, from the word dokeo, seemed to be human. It wasn't really human. John's Gospel goes out of its way to argue the point. He says, the Word was with God, the Word was God. So far, so good. Nobody's going to be astonished yet. And then verse 14, the Word became flesh and lived right among us. Here's where at least the Gnostics in his audience would have said, really? How can spirit become matter? How can divine beings truly be human as well? So that's the point he's making here. He's going to make the other point later. It's also important to confess that Jesus is God's son. But here the point is, if you don't confess that Jesus really did come in the flesh, didn't become a fully human person, you're a false prophet, you're speaking out of the world, you're speaking from false spirits. Okay? So, confessing Jesus has come in the flesh, en sarki, is every spirit which confesses Jesus Christ having come in the flesh is from God. It's the ones who deny it who are not. And every spirit who does not confess Jesus is not from God. Notice, if you don't confess that Jesus came in the flesh, you're not confessing Jesus. You have a false Christology if it doesn't include the full humanity of Jesus. Now, if this had been homologoon, I think. I'm quite sure of the ending here. Definite article participle. Actually, would have been own, wouldn't it? No, it's an epsilon contract. Yeah, it probably is. Anyway, the one confessing, then we'd understand the may, because this would be a participle, and this takes a may. Because this is an indicative verb, this time we have a relative pronoun, every spirit which doesn't confess, could actually have been an oo, would have been an acceptable way to write it, would have been the normal way to write it. I think Mounce, when he was pointing this out in his textbook, he says, usually oo is going to be used with indicatives, and normally may, probably always may, is going to be used with non-indicatives. Here you have a may where you could actually have used an oo, because this is an indicative verb. Every spirit which does not confess Jesus is not from God, and this is the, we don't get the noun, but it's implied. So every spirit that doesn't confess Jesus isn't from God, and this is the spirit, ta pneuma, of the Antichrist, which you have heard that it is coming. Now, the antecedent for which is not Antichrist, because then it would have been Han, would have been a masculine accusative. This is a neuter accusative. Which? It's actually hard to fit the grammar in at all. I don't know if that's nominative or accusative. But the point is that this is neuter, and so the antecedent is this word pneuma. You have heard that the spirit of Antichrist, is coming. Now, of course, if the spirit of Antichrist comes, then Antichrist also comes. But at this point, he's talking about the spirits. Don't believe every spirit. There are spirits who confess correctly. There are spirits who confess wrongly. The spirit of the Antichrist is the one that denies the humanity of Jesus, and you knew that was going to be coming. You've been told, which you have heard, that it is coming. And now already is in the world. So you knew it was coming, but it's actually here already. This is part of this already, not yet. John isn't claiming that there's never going to be yet another Antichrist. It's all fulfilled. The return of Jesus is certainly going to be in our generation. That's not the point. The point is, all through this age until Jesus returns, there will be truth and error. There will be God and the world. There will be the flesh. There will be, well, actually, that's an important point. The flesh was used negatively earlier. All that is in the world, the lust of the flesh. Here it's used positively. It's just human person. Jesus came in the flesh. He didn't come in sinfulness. He came into the world, which isn't always negative. He came in the flesh. And all through this era until Jesus comes back, there will be those who do or don't confess correctly who Jesus is. There was one more thing I wanted to say, but I'm forgetting what it is. Perfect, indicative, you have heard. This is a second perfect because there's no Ka over here. Has sort of an odd reduplication. So you have heard that it was coming, and you are therefore now presently fully aware of it. And already now it's here. Next screen. You are from God, children, and you have conquered them. So who's the them? It can't really be the false spirits, because that would have been a neuter. Auta. It must be the false prophets, that's masculine, or anyone who teaches wrongly. You've overcome them. And how did you overcome? How did you discern and guard against their errors? Because now he's going to compare two people, two entities. The in you person and the in the world person. Because greater is the in you person than the in the world person, or if you want to switch the wording around, because the one in you is greater than this one. So normally when you have a comparative like that, you would use a genitive for the thing you're comparing, greater than, and you put it in the genitive. But not if you use this word, because this is the word that means than, and then you put them both in the same case. So this one is greater than this one. So the one in the world would be the devil, would be the spirit of the Antichrist, and the one in you, you could say it's Jesus, because we abide in him and he abides in us, but more recently at the end of chapter 3 we've been told it's the spirit that he has given us. The one in us is God's spirit who helps us discern truth from error. They, that is the false teachers, out of the world are, again, this doesn't mean they're out of the world, they actually are in the world, they're out of the community in the world, but they're from the world, they're speaking from the world, their origin is the world. They are from the world on account of this, so now this one looks backwards, because they're from the world, on account of this, they are speaking from the world. They're speaking motivated by the worldly opinions and convictions. And not only are they speaking from the world, and the world hears them. This word hear takes a genitive if you're going to name the person that they heard. It takes an accusative if you talk about the thing they heard. So they hear the word, it would be ton logon, accusative, but they hear them. Now you go into the genitive of the thing, of the person heard. Okay, so they belong to the world, they speak accordingly, the world listens to them. We, by contrast, are from God. The one who knows God, again, this is that substantival participle, the one who knows God hears us. So this brings up an interesting question. Who's the us? For quite a while now, the us, the we, has been we, the Christian community. We are the ones who must love one another. We are the ones who are given God's Spirit. We. It's always the Christian community. But it doesn't work so well here as the Christian community, because the one who knows God hears the Christian community. No, they don't. The ones outside the Christian community don't hear God. They hear the false prophets. So he's now talking about a group within the community. So the ones who know God, those true believers inside the Christian community, hear us. I think he's now more narrowly viewing the us as the apostles. That's the way he started his letter. We touched him, we heard him, we saw him, we were there when it happened. We're passing on our testimony so that you can share with us community. So now it's we together. Except now he's talking about, so which belief system are we going to align ourselves with? The false prophets who lead people in the world astray because the world listens to them, or the true spokespersons for the truth, the apostolic witness that true believers are going to listen to. So I think this we is more likely true Christian teachers in John's mind. That would include the apostles and those like them who lead the Christian community in the right direction, in contrast to the false prophets who lead others away. The one who knows God hears us. The one who, could have used on, whoever, but in this case just the one who not is from God doesn't hear us. So we proclaim truth. Some hear it, some don't. That's one of the ways that you know who belongs to God and who doesn't. In fact, that's what he just says. In this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of deception. How do we distinguish between the spirit of truth and the spirit of deception? Well, we check who's speaking, we check what they're saying, and we check who's listening. If it's the true prophets of God, filled with the Spirit of God, proclaiming a correct Christian confession, among other things, also promoting love, obedience, etc. That's coming from God, and the Christian community listens. If it's motivated by the world and its priorities, it's the false teachers, it's the Antichrist. So you have false Christs, you have false spirits, and of course you have the people who follow them. So there is a spirit of truth, the spirit who speaks truth, the truthful spirit perhaps, and then there's the spirit of deception. This is the adjective that goes with the verb we saw previously. Don't let anyone deceive you. This is the word to deceive, and that's the noun deception, spirit of deception. All right, that gets us to chapter 4, verse 6.